What's the difference between geology and mineralogy? So when we've done our geology units in the past, we may have followed some of these similar topics, not necessarily in this order, but we would have talked about earthquakes and fossils and different types of rocks. And while some of these topics are going to be approached in mineralogy, the focus and the aim is entirely different. So for the mineralogy main lesson block, we do want to start with the whole and move to the parts, which is part of the pedagogy for Waldorf education. But the way that we're going to go about doing it is very different. We want to keep in mind the development of the child. So this is going to be for grade 6. So we're looking at students about 11 or 12, even 13. And we want to be looking at the whole, then moving into the parts. So when we're looking at the whole and moving into the parts, you might think, well, the whole is all of the world, or maybe the whole is all of the mountain. And these are two examples that are given in this main lesson book, but we want to look at something that's a little bit more practical for the student. We want to look at something that the student can grasp, can understand, and most importantly, can sense. So what is observable to the student? So we're going to be starting with the two archetypal rocks, which this concept gave me a lot of trouble in understanding it to begin with, but we're looking at limestone and we're looking at granite, and then we're seeing the different minerals that are within those, and then we are using that as a theme as we progress through all of our lessons. Now, I do want to say that while we did do some of these topics, what's going to be more challenging for a student to understand is, for instance, geological time. That's an abstract concept that's better served for the high school student or for the student post-puberty. Something else that's better suited for an older student are the layers of the earth. So while you can understand volcanoes and magma and lava, understanding the mantle and the outer core and the inner core, that's something that's also best served for a high school student rather than your middle school aged student. There are some other topics and their progression that on a basic level, on a sense level, the students can understand, and especially if it relates to your local geology, which we did spend a lot of time talking about, but on a grander scale, some of that geology is also, again, better served for the high school student. So what do you want to focus on with your students for a mineralogy block? What you want to dive into is the things that are perceived, an imaginative grasp of the whole mineral kingdom, and you want to be aware not to go into too much of the chemical classification structures, the division of the minerals into oxides, halides, and so on. And that's, again, something that you will dive into in chemistry at the high school level, not at the middle school level. So if we're not going to be doing all of these things that you're typically going to find in a geology unit study, then what are you actually going to do? What you're going to do is you're going to start with granite and limestone, and these are the two archetypal rocks. And when you divide the rocks into those two kinds, then you can really see how magma, fire rocks, igneous rocks, granite, and then intrusive and extrusive rocks are formed. And then you can see the difference with limestone and how that's a water rock, and how those kinds of, the formation of those kinds of rocks are entirely different. And you can really see the two sort of paired together and the differences between them. We're also going to be looking at the formation of mountains and those geological forces. Now, again, mountains are something that you can see, but things that happen deep in the earth are not going to be as relatable for the student. But mountains are relatable because we see them, we experience them, and understanding the formation of them through geological and tectonic activity actually makes sense to the student. But the deeper you go to the layers underneath the earth that are not as relatable to the student, those topics are best left for the high school student or post-puberty. When we go into some of these topics regarding limestone or the water cycle, which I included, or even the rock cycle, you're looking at ideas of cycle that takes you from one step to the next to the next. So with the limestone cycle, for instance, we're looking at how limestone is created. Then we're looking at how it is transported, dissolved, transported again, redeposited, and reused again. And this is a really beautiful and relatable, because you can see the limestone, you can see the stalactites and the stalagmites in caves. So it's a very relatable topic to understand. Then when we're looking at fire rocks and granite, intrusive rocks, extrusive rocks, in pumice or obsidian, you're looking at fire rocks, and then you're looking at how they can then recycle and be reformed, and that within the magma, within the lava, are all of the minerals that are necessary in order to produce these different kinds of rocks and have different kinds of minerals within these rocks that then we can use. And the curriculum ends with looking at iron ore in igneous rocks and the granite rocks in particular, and looking at limestone and the derivatives of limestone, which would be cement and mortar and concrete. And you can see how we use those today. So I really loved the whole arc of this main lesson block, so different than our approach with geology. Now, if you chose to do a geology unit rather than mineralogy, you certainly can get a lot of value out of it. I'm just sharing this earth science flip chart to share with you some of the topics that you might explore in geology. You certainly could use these topics, and if you wanted to make it a little bit more relatable for your pre-puberty child, then I would just recommend that you keep things that are like that they can sense, that are able to be perceived. So things that are so far back in time, geological time scale, which is even difficult for an adult to understand. Those kinds of things, while you may address them, because we certainly did, trying to solidify some of that time scale might be a little bit too abstract for them. The way that we approach this lesson in particular, talking about geological time and the formation of petroleum and oil, is that I tried to use illustrations that were, in my mind, quite imaginative and almost fantastical. So here's an image of the ferns and different kinds of fern trees and horsetail and club mosses in a time when oil and coal was produced. And so it was a very limited time in Earth's history when these materials were produced. And so my illustration, my attempt was to make it a little bit more fantastical. Same with my illustration on limestone, because again, these formations occurred in a geological past, a time that is sometimes really hard to conceive even for adults. So the illustration I tried to make a little bit more imaginative when trying to talk about these different topics that might otherwise be a little bit hard to fully understand and to wrap your head around. I hope this helps in understanding the difference between mineralogy and geology. You can find all of the lesson tutorials for these lessons on my blog post for geology on my website at pepperandpine.com.